Hey everybody, welcome back to Chipstock Investor. We have another great episode today on Lam Research.
Here's what we're going to talk about today. Lam Research's earnings for the September quarter, which just ended a few weeks ago, why it's not a repeat of the ASML disaster, what's NAND memory got to do with all of this. Rather than just kind of give you a recap of earnings, we thought we would talk about a specific technology that we think will propel Lam to new highs in the next couple of years.
You didn't read it exactly as I wrote it. What's NAND got to do with it?
Like the song?
That's right.
Almost like the song.
Almost like the song.
Okay, sorry.
Cue Tina Turner. And then we're going to talk about molybdenum, or moly. Is that the new tungsten? We'll show you why that's important to semiconductor manufacturing. And then we'll finally finish up the episode with Lam's future prospects and our outlook for 2025. As Nick mentioned, there has been a lot of discussion regarding the Fab 5 companies, especially after ASML's earnings disaster. But remember, ASML and KLA Corp are both specialists. The other three, including Lam Research, are generalists. So their fate is not going to be exactly the same as a company like ASML.
So as a generalist, Lam Research participates in many of the manufacturing steps across the semiconductor manufacturing process chain. It's an enabler of lithography like that provided by ASML, with deposition and etch that happen on either side of the actual lithography exposure step of those silicon wafers. But there's a lot of deposition and etch that actually happens that's not at all part of the lithography step. So let's talk about that after we discuss a couple of just very brief highlights from the September quarter.
Here's the guidance that Lam Research post for this most recent quarter that ended in September. You can see revenue was supposed to come in just over $4 billion, and that earnings per share on a non-GAAP basis of $8 per share. Here are the results for that most recent quarter. You can see revenue came in at $4.17 billion, just over the midpoint, up 7.8% quarter over quarter and 20% year over year. And drawing your eyes down to the earnings per share, only at 86 cents. Before you freak out about the earnings per share, remember that they did a 10-for-1 stock split at the beginning of October. So that earnings per share on the 10-for-1 stock split basis, up 10% quarter over quarter and up 28% year over year.
So the takeaway here from this is Lam's financial guidance came in near the high end of their guidance range. And while they didn't give specific guidance for 2025, they did say they do expect to continue to grow in calendar year 2025. We don't know exactly how much yet. Some of the same headwinds that are affecting ASML, like a normalization of the sales to China, are still in play for Lam, but ultimately Lam will grow. We'll see in another 3 months what they say specifically, what to expect as far as how much growth. So we're fine with this. And it's been a while since we've done a reverse discounted cash flow estimate. This is where you plug in some numbers to see what type of growth expectations the market is baking in right now to get to a fair value of the current stock price, which as of this recording is $77 per share. We plugged in trailing 12-month earnings per share on a GAAP basis of $3.10, an earnings per share growth rate of 20% for 2 years. That roughly accounts for what we think will be this next growth cycle for Lam, and a terminal growth rate of 4.5% thereafter, discount rate of 10%. That's what gets us to $77 as a fair value, the current stock price. In the early stages of a new growth cycle, we still think this is a pretty reasonable bar for Lam to clear, and so we're happy to continue owning and nibbling on this stock.
Before we continue, we just want to shout out to Moomoo, today's sponsor.
For investors new to Moomoo, if you sign up for a new account right now, you still have the ability to get 15 free stocks added to your account, and they're going to kick in some cash as well with a deposit bonus. Check Moomoo out in the link found below in the description. Might get you some help when setting up a new account, get you a little boost to your investment journey.
Check it out in the link below. Here's our end market segment breakdown and current cycle. You can see, excluding AI and accelerated compute, most of the semi industry is just pulling out of a prolonged down cycle. And ultimately, this recovery is just taking longer than expected. What we all want to see is a sharp line up and to the right, but really what we're getting is a much more muted line to the right. We'll address this more at the end of the video.
Okay, we have earnings out of the way now. It was a good earnings report, and everything is still proceeding for Lam Research as we expected it would. So let's talk about some of the specific technology that's being developed right now that we think will help the company continue to stay in growth mode for another 2 years or so, maybe less, maybe longer. Let's talk about one of them. So by now, you're probably very well aware of high bandwidth memory, HBM. We've talked about this many times when we've addressed Lam, Applied Materials. We've also talked about some of the new logic chip developments taking place that Lam participates in. We also did a video about ruthenium and Applied Materials a couple of months ago. What we haven't talked a whole lot about, though, is NAND memory, or as you often hear it called, perhaps flash memory. Let's talk about one thing happening in these NAND chips, especially 3D NAND for high-end applications, and how Lam is expecting to realize some very significant growth from this market.
The difference between 3D NAND and high bandwidth memory is that NAND is not made by stacking memory chip die one upon the other. They're manufactured by depositing lots of layers of silicon dioxide and silicon nitride with metal interconnects between the layers and between the memory cells.
One of the layers in those metal interconnects is tungsten. Tungsten has been used for a long time in making flash NAND memory. But as manufacturers have advanced to now 200 plus layers in the last couple of years, and some of them have a roadmap to reaching 1,000 layers, perhaps by year 2030, tungsten just isn't going to cut it anymore. So Lam Research is helping them switch to molybdenum, or Moly. You can see in the periodic table, if you think back to your chemistry class, what is molybdenum and what is tungsten? Well, they're metallic elements. Tungsten is actually further down in the periodic table. It's in row 6. Molybdenum is in row 5. So why Moly, as Lam Research has been calling it? Why Moly instead of tungsten?
Management talked about this development quite a bit during the earnings call, and this quote is from CEO Timothy Archer. For one thing, Moly has better qualities at the atomic level, like minimizing electric current leakage. Archer also said that this is just one of several very important technology advances that will drive Lam's growth via new equipment sales and existing equipment upgrades.
And the reason for this is Lam already has lots of equipment installed at its memory chip makers and some of the logic and foundry chip makers as well that use tungsten, or that help with depositing the deposition of tungsten. And in some cases, the equipment can simply just be upgraded to also handle Moly, or some new equipment can be sold and installed entirely to help with the deposition of Moly. We have a number of resources here if you'd like to read more about the technicals of all of this and how it actually works. There's an article on semiengineering.com. There's also a Google Patents write-up that was submitted by Lam Research. And then pictured here is an article from Semiconductor Digest from this time last year, a year ago, explaining this transition from tungsten to Moly. This has been coming for a while, and it looks like that upgrade cycle is now here.
Maybe we should have a little briefer on what exactly 3D NAND looks like and where tungsten or Moly will fit into the device.
Yeah, this is a little video that Lam Research put together all the way back in 2016. So this is first here a common cross-section view of a NAND chip architecture. First, you can see the deposition of those silicon dioxide and silicon nitride layers that Casey mentioned earlier. And again, these are now the most advanced NAND chips, more than 200 layers, quickly scaling towards 300 plus layers within the next year or two. We're going to fast forward in this video from Lam Research. After multiple etching steps where the deposition of some of those silicon materials are cut away and cut down to make room for the metal interconnects, you can see tungsten or Moly as a thin film layer used for what's called word line fill. between the different layers of that silicon, and also as sort of a barrier between the silicon and what will eventually become the copper interconnect, the through silicon vias that go through those NAND chip layers.
So for the placement of tungsten, plasma enhanced CVD or chemical vapor deposition is used. But for moly, an even more precise method of CVD can be used called ALD or atomic level deposition. You may remember this from when we talked about it in previous videos on ASM International. That's another Dutch manufacturing specialty company.
Yeah, not to be confused with ASML. ASM International, different business entirely.
Specializing in ALD.
Yes.
As all these layers get smaller and more precise, moly and ALD can help with better uniformity, conformality, and surface smoothness, all of which makes for better performing NAND devices.
Now, Lam has two product families that are helping with this manufacturing transition. The first on the left here is the Altus product family, which is either ALD or CVD, or a combination of both processes integrated into one machine. And then on the right, the Striker family, which is specifically for that ALD process, atomic layer deposition. So this is where things get really interesting if you think about the semiconductor industry supply chain. And hopefully we've helped explain why we've focused in on the manufacturing equipment companies like Lam Research, and then some of the ultimate end device technologists, and a lot less the actual integrated device manufacturers in the middle. Companies like Micron, Samsung, SK Hynix, Western Digital, SanDisk. They acquired SanDisk about 8 years ago. All of those manufacturers need to invest in a company like Lam Research and its equipment technology so that they can keep up with each other and land a sale to the ultimate device assembler and technologist. That would be a company like, for example, Pure Storage, one of Casey's top picks at the beginning of 2024.
All of this advance in technology is great news for Lam shareholders, of course, but it's also great news for companies that utilize NAND chips in their products. We've got a chart here from our friends at FinChat, link in the description below to get access to your membership, 15% off, get you a great deal on making these beautiful charts. We have total revenue, net income, and free cash flow for Lam Research. It's all still steadily climbing on a sequential basis. It could take a couple of years for Lam to reach all-time highs that were last achieved during the pandemic supply chain disruptions, but we're still very pleased with the progress and still happy to own Lam and possibly nibble some more on Lam as the year progresses.
Now, we'll circle back to specific 2025 financial guidance here in just a few months when Lam does their December quarter update, probably mid to late January. But at this point, again, like we showed you in our reverse DCF earlier in this video, I think at this point we're content hearing from Lam that they still expect to grow in 2025. And in fact, wafer fab equipment sales overall are still expected to grow and probably reach new heights in 2025. That guidance that we've been talking about all year hasn't really changed at this point, even though ASML downgraded its outlook for 2025. Casey, when we started Chipstock Investor just a little over 2 years ago, we said one of the things that was going to drive the semiconductor market forward wasn't going to be the same thing that drove semiconductor advancement over the last decade. One of them is materials engineering, and that plays right into the hands of companies like Lam Research and Applied Materials. Lam does not rely on ASML advanced lithography equipment. In fact, it can do a lot of things using existing older ASML litho equipment. And its manufacturing partners might be more than happy to take that Lam equipment that costs a whole lot less than, $200, $300, $400 million a pop, like advanced high NA EUV. So we're very happy with where Lam's at in this cycle. We're happy with where Applied Materials is at in this cycle. We're going to let it ride. And as Casey said, we're going to keep nibbling on this one.
Thanks everybody for watching this episode of Chipstock Investor. Make sure you're subbed to the channel and please check out our Semiconductor Insider membership. Just $5 gets you access to our Discord channel, live Q&As, and all of our show notes. It's a very valuable service. I think you'll enjoy it. Check it out. See you all again soon at Chipstock Investor.